Welcome back to OtakuDaiKun. Dai here, and this video is one that a few of you have requested, and I'm more than happy to oblige. I'll be going over the lore of Kara no Kyoukai, the Garden of Sinners. It started out as a series of novels written by Kinoko Nasu of Type Moon, and all but one of those novels have been made into animated films by Ufotable. These films, which I group together as a collective work, gather into what I'd consider to be one of my favorite anime of all time. Alongside series like Fate Stay Night and Steins Gate. From a review perspective, I'd recommend it as a legendary anime. While sold as an expensive import release from Aniplex, I consider it one of the best releases I own. Sadly, I bet a lot of anime fans don't even know much about it, since it's never really been available in retail stores or on any legal streaming sites. It's a shame, given that viewers can only really see it by forking out around $400 or resorting to piracy. Regardless, I highly encourage you all to see this anime series, and to revisit this video for a deeper understanding. Otherwise, beware spoilers, as I literally discuss the entire story. Just like Fate Stay Night, many of the Type Moon projects written by Kinoko Nasu exist as part of what fans like to call the Nasu-verse. Kara no Kyoukai is essentially part of this fictional universe, but technically exists in an alternate reality to Type Moon's other visual novel, Tsukihime. This is because both Kara no Kyoukai and Tsukihime deal with similar plot elements and their characters overlap. Regardless, it's very possible to view Kara no Kyoukai and Fate Stay Night as being part of the same universe, as seen in collaborations like Fate Grand Order and Fate Extra. This means you can take everything I've said about Fate Stay Night in my two-part special and apply it to Kara no Kyoukai. But just in case you haven't seen those videos, I'll briefly go over the basics. The world of Kara no Kyoukai is one in which mages harness mana in order to manipulate the world around them. There was once an age of gods where this was more prevalent, but most mages of the modern era practice their craft in secret. One of the few groups of organized mages is the Mages Association, which operates a magic academy at a place called the Clock Tower in London. Three other elements also present in Fate lore are the Root, Deterrent Force, and Origins. Within Kara no Kyoukai, there is a metaphysical location known as Akasha, the root of all existence. It is the place where life originates and ultimately returns to. It also holds the Akashic records, the infinite history of the universe, as well as all possible realities. Needless to say, mages that successfully covet the root wind up gifted with true magic and immense power. Turns out, though, that reaching the root is a royal pain in the ass, given that the Earth itself aims to prevent mages from reaching it. Long story short, the Earth has forces at work to preserve its existence, as well as the lives of its inhabitants. Think of it like a supernatural force that takes action to defend the Earth from threats. This force, the Deterrent Force, opposes a mage's quest to reach the root, fearing that the root's power would be too great for people to possess. Then there's the Origin. Basically, life occurs on Earth when an idea or concept leaves the root and takes material form. That means every living being has an origin, the idea that they were formed from. If someone is awakened to their origin, they begin to take on its characteristics. Now, before actually tackling the story, it's important to note that both the films and original novels of Kara no Kyoukai are presented out of chronological order. That alone is enough to complicate this already deep narrative. So for this video, we'll be discussing the chapters not in the order presented, but instead via their chronological importance. While I understand why the chapters were presented out of order, I prefer to watch them linearly, especially because the end of both orientations is the same, and the order swap only affects the early chapters. Before the plot takes over, we've got some exposition to tackle. Things start with a talented mage, Toko Aozaki, who was to become the head of her mage family until the decision was made to make her sister heir instead. This caused Toko to flee to the Mages Association and study at the Clock Tower. She studied there until becoming a master at the age of 20. During her studies, Toko encountered two important people. The first was Soren Araya, a former Buddhist monk who has lived for centuries by transferring his soul from body to body. During his long life, he encountered and failed to save a great many people, forcing him into depression, pondering if there was a meaning to those otherwise pointless deaths. As a mage, he sought to reach the root and destroy reality itself. Upon doing this, he would gain the power to search through the history of every human who's ever lived, and discover their greatest, happiest moment. Essentially, his goal was to use the power of the root to bring himself peace of mind. Sauron has the ability to see and awaken origins. As such, he woke his own origin, stillness, granting him near immortality. The other person Toko encountered at the clock tower was Cornelius Alba. The two of them got along well until Toko surpassed him in skill and accomplishments. Despite technically being the more capable Magus, this caused him to have a deep inferiority complex, one that would only be settled by fulfilling his desire to kill Toko. The three of them possess a talent for puppetry, which in this case means they could build, control, and inhabit automata, human-like puppet familiars. By the events of Kata no Kyoukai, Toko had already left the Mages Association and instead opened up a small production company, Garan no Do, where she mostly takes jobs building puppets and investigating supernatural phenomena. Meanwhile, we have our protagonist, Shiki Ryogi, whose family is a part of the Demon Hunter organization. The family has mostly retired from that role, and her father lives as a Yakuza lord and wealthy landowner. Nevertheless, the Ryogi family holds a tradition of developing two distinct personalities in its members. This was so that each personality could specialize in different skills, which is effective for their demon hunting past. Shiki's brother was unable to form a second personality, whereas Shiki was a complete success. The ideal dual personality would come from a child with the origin nothingness. And this happened to be Shiki's origin. The family awakened her origin, giving rise to the first of what would be 3 different personalities contained within her. To keep track of these different personalities, I'll refer to this one as Origin Shiki. Turns out that having an origin of nothingness caused Shiki to be connected to the root at all times. She would, under normal circumstances, be erased by the deterrent force due to her connection with the root. But the Ryogi family was able to prevent that from happening. While Shiki's original personality has access to the great power of the root, she finds no meaning in such power. This personality created 2 others, which I'll call Male Shiki and Female Shiki, before going dormant and hiding between them. Now, her main personality is the feminine Shiki we're familiar with in the anime, contrasted by the second, masculine Shiki. This is damn confusing, but it's best to realize that Shiki has a total of 3 personalities, only 2 of which are usually active. As a result, her 2 main personalities are not aware of the third that created them, and her third personality rarely affects the story. So what the hell do I mean by multiple personalities? How does that even work? Thankfully, it's as you might imagine. At any given moment, Shiki's body is controlled by one of her 3 personalities, almost like separate people taking turns running the show. While one personality is active, the others aren't conscious. The only contact occurs when they swap control, during which they sense each other's feelings, but not memories. When Shiki was a young girl, she visited her dying grandfather, who told her that people can only truly kill someone once in their lifetime. Essentially, this meant that killing more than once would make someone inhuman. Shiki takes this as an important message about the value of life. Unfortunately, while Shiki understands the weight of murder, her masculine personality controlled all of her negative urges and provoked her with murderous impulses. As a result, her masculine personality is subordinate to her feminine one. Shiki herself is quite skilled in combat, in part thanks to her sword training against her father. By the time the first chronological chapter begins, Shiki is about to enter high school as a first year. This is where Mikiya Kokuto comes into play. While he would enroll in the same school as Shiki, he actually met her one snowy night prior to classes. He found Shiki at one of the very rare moments she was being controlled by her third personality, Origin Shiki, the one connected to the root. Because of this, when they meet again in school, Shiki does not recognize him. Kokuto has no special abilities to speak of, but he's important for his closeness and fascination with Shiki, which ultimately becomes one of her only constants in life to rely on. So school's in session, and one of their classmates, Leo Shirazumi, has an unhealthy obsession with Shiki. Afraid of confronting her directly with his feelings, he instead stalks her and collects photographs and videos of her. When he finally does confess to her, she turns him down by saying she doesn't like weak people. This must have broken his tiny brain, as he now felt he needed to prove himself to be strong. He provoked a school bully and, in a fight, wound up killing him in a dark alley. In the wake of this madness, Leo partially woke to his origin, consumption, and reasoned he should eat the murdered body to eliminate the evidence. Soren Araya, the guy I mentioned before, who covets the root to wipe out reality, finds Leo mid-meal and encourages him to finish, congratulating him on becoming aware of his origin. Soren then gives Leo the chance to fully awaken to his origin, which he agrees to in hopes of becoming stronger. Things don't turn out as Leo would have hoped, as waking to his origin made him crave human flesh. Of course, Soren didn't do this just for the fun of it. After failing in various ways to reach the root, he somehow learned of Shiki's origin of nothingness, which he planned on using to gain access to the root. He hoped that Leo could somehow provoke Origin Shiki, which Soren would then take advantage of. That's quite a lot of exposition, but we're finally ready to dive into the first chronological chapter, which is Chapter 2, Murder Speculation Part 1. In it, we see Shiki at the site of a few murders, often infatuated by the death and blood around her. Without knowing better, we're led to think that Shiki has been murdering these people, but we can now see that this is not the case. Soren Araya let Leo know about Shiki's murderous impulses, which overjoys him, as they now hold back a violent temptation to kill. As such, Leo seeks to provoke Shiki by specifically killing people so that she'd find them on her late-night walks as her masculine personality. This sort of works, given that she finds the bodies and is taken in by the death she witnesses, but she never goes so far as to kill anyone herself. His goal, in killing a total of 6 people, was to convince Shiki that she had killed them, and even frame her for the murders. It reaches a point where Shiki definitely feels she's dangerous, and she pushes Kokuto away to keep him safe. She stops wandering around at night. Kokuto, on the other hand, does not believe Shiki is the murderer, despite many clues pointing toward her. He camps out at the Ryogi estate, keeping an eye on her out of concern. Eventually, all this crap builds up and pushes Shiki into an actual murderous fit. She hunts down Kokuto and is about to kill him, torn between her urge to kill him and her growing affection for him. This chapter leaves out information, but I'll fill in the gap for you as it's revealed later. Soren takes this opportunity to attack Shiki and hopefully draw out her third personality, but she escapes and Kokuto chases after her. The masculine Shiki, she's also in love with Kokuto, which is torture being the only other emotion she has besides murder. Knowing Kokuto won't leave her, she decides to commit suicide, running out in the way of a speeding car. Soren can't use her origin if she's dead, so he backs off and stops Leo's murder spree. For the time being, he deems the attempt a failure. At this point, Chapter 2 and Chapter 4, The Hollow Shrine, overlap, so I'll just stay with the chronological order of events. Getting hit by a car didn't quite kill Shiki, but it put her in a near-death coma for 2 years. During this time, Kokuto remains loyal and affectionate, and visits her in the hospital often. He graduates high school, and winds up getting a job working for Toko Aozaki at her small office company, Garan no Do. This is because he took a liking to one of her dolls that looked like Shiki. Whilst in her coma, Shiki's consciousness was lost in the void of her origin, nothingness. During this time, her masculine personality sacrifices itself and goes away, allowing Shiki to finally wake up. Turns out, she didn't wake up completely empty-handed. There are times when the root will release fragments of power called mysteries, special abilities that living beings wind up possessing. From her trip in the void, Shiki obtained a mystery called the Mystic Eyes of Death Perception. Essentially, she could now see lines of death, imperfections in the existence of all things, both living and non-living. By severing these lines, she would cause things to fall apart and cease existing. At first, this isn't something Shiki wants. It freaks her out, and she tries to blind herself, but even that doesn't seem to stop her ability. It isn't until Toko shows up and truly explains what's happening to her that she's able to move forward. She's unsettled, not just by the inability to control her eyes, but because she's suffering a major identity crisis after losing such a large part of herself, her male personality. This dilemma of hers attracted spirits at night, and one eventually controls a corpse to attack her. Deciding to live thanks to her masculine personality's sacrifice, she fights back against the corpse, and ultimately accepts Toko's offer to train her in exchange for helping out at Garan no Do. From this point on, we can see the feminine Shiki becoming a lot harsher and more tomboyish, trying to compensate and re-identify herself. The next part of the story is Chapter 3, Remaining Sense of Pain. I mentioned that Shiki's family used to be active with the Demon Hunter organization. It wasn't just them. Other families were a part of the organization as well. One such family was the Asagami family. Like the Ryogi family, the Asagami family is no longer active with the organization, but their children still inherit their abilities, a mystery called the Mystic Eyes of Distortion. The youngest daughter, Fujino, inherited the family's telekinetic powers, but her stepfather tried to suppress them via medication, deeming them to no longer be desirable. Well, the drugs worked, but they also took away her ability to feel pain. During high school, Fujino would leave her school's campus twice a month for medical checkups. On her way back, she was nabbed by a group of rapists, and has been raped by them on occasion ever since. This gang of rapists noticed her apathy, her lack of emotion during their assaults. One of the men thought it would be a great idea to strike her in the spine with a baseball bat. The shock from the hit brought her pain back, and at the same time, her telekinetic powers. Now, it turns out Fujino wasn't exactly healthy to begin with. She had a terminal case of appendicitis, but she had no idea what it felt like or what kind of pain it brought her. On a different night, one of the rapists attempted to stab her in the stomach, and, in defense, her telekinesis activated, and she murdered all but one of the rapists by twisting and mangling their bodies. Despite not having any stab wounds, Fujino thought she had been stabbed due to an intense abdominal pain that was actually being caused by her appendicitis. She goes out on the street to search for the escaped rapist, to take revenge and to silence him as a witness. Unfortunately, she was still injured in the spine from the previous rape. Again, our good old pal Sauron shows up and offers Fujino some assistance. He heals her injury, hoping that she'll wind up fighting Shiki and possibly surpass her. Fujino goes on a murder spree, trying to track down the rapist that got away. Her stepfather winds up hiring Garan-no-Do to kill her, and Shiki sets off as soon as Fujino kills an innocent person driving down the highway. They fight, and Shiki winds up losing her arm to Fujino's twisting attack. Shiki begins to recognize Fujino's attacks, allowing her to cut them and win the battle. However, at the last second, Fujino loses her sensitivity to pain, along with her telekinesis. Instead of killing her, Shiki kills the appendicitis. Damn! She'd make one hell of a doctor. She could slice up cancer and save countless lives. Fujino gets hospitalized, and Shiki tells Kokuto that she gained a faint memory from her lost personality, a memory of wanting to kill him. Of course, this also means she gained a memory of loving Kokuto, which cheers her up. The next chronological chapter is actually the first chapter in the series, Overlooking the Scenery. Once again, Soren is up to no good and tracks down Kyrie Fujo, another member of a demon hunter family. She's bedridden in the hospital and has been since she was 17 thanks to a serious illness. Wanting to use her like his other pawns, Soren gave her the ability of dual existence, which was basically a second body she could project almost like a ghost. Kyrie's family specialized in curses, and she uses this power to curse the Fujo building and those that pass by it, causing a series of schoolgirls to commit suicide by jumping from the building's roof. Kokuto heads to the scene to investigate, but is put in a coma by Kyrie's powers. She could have killed him, so why not? Turns out, she has a crush on Kokuto, and is spiteful to Shiki because he'd always visit her at the hospital during her coma. Kokuto gets taken back to Garan-no-Do, and Shiki is sent to investigate in his stead. She sees Kyrie's body floating along with ghostly apparitions of the dead girls. Blame the curse or whatever, but the girls' unconscious minds were living on as they had not yet reached the same state as their corpses. When Shiki actually enters the complex, Kyrie is able to possess her prosthetic arm to fight against her. In defense, Shiki amputates her arm to escape. She rendezvous with Toko in order to get her arm repaired and improved. In the meantime, Shiki finds her stubborn self hopelessly lonely without Kokuto, and vows to free him from Kyrie's curse. New and improved, she reaches the top of the building and defeats Kyrie in battle, thanks to having an affinity for death that renders her immune to the suggestion of suicide. No longer wishing to remain bedridden, Kyrie wheels herself out of the hospital, to the top of the Fujo building, and leaps to her death. This releases the curse on Kokuto, and he's able to wake up. The next chapter in the timeline is actually one of the very last in the series, Future Gospel, which starts out mostly as a side story. In it, a bomber for hire, Mitsuru Kamekura becomes obsessed with killing Shiki. You see, he has a special ability of precognition. More specifically, his right eye can accurately predict future events, allowing him to arrange for bombs to destroy property without causing casualties. He's witnessed one night by Shiki, and for the first time, his right eye fails to completely see the future, lacking knowledge of Shiki's name. So, both to silence a witness and overcome the flaws in his vision, he stalks Shiki and plants bombs to try and kill her. At the predicted time of her death, however, Shiki sees the form of Mitsuru's prediction and kills it with her mystic eyes. This kills his ability to predict the future. During this, Kokuto converses with a girl named Shizune Seo. Apparently, she has a very keen sense of observational awareness, which allows her to calculate a prediction on what might happen in the future. This is different from Mitsuru's magical precognition, as it's nothing more than well-informed calculation. The next chapter is the real mindfuck of the series. Part number 5, Paradox Spiral. Told without all the wild editing, it's not actually that complicated. We already know Sauron is trying his damnedest to reach the root, and now he's actually trying to take things into his own hands. He teams up with his old school buddy, Cornelius Alba, to modify the Ogawa apartment complex in a very specific way that he hopes will gain him access to the swirl of the root. First off, he altered the walls so they'd supernaturally cause depression in the building's residents, causing them to all go crazy and kill each other. He then took advantage of Cornelius's talents as a puppet maker to reconstruct the dead tenants as dolls, being controlled by their preserved brains in the building's basement. Sauron swapped the orientation of the elevator to hide the real corpses, while their dolls would continually live out their final days of life. To be perfectly honest, why this would somehow prevent the deterrent force and grant access to the root is completely beyond me. Maybe they were trying to confuse the shit out of the deterrent force just as much as this chapter confuses its viewers. If so, I'm not surprised, really. Anyway, Sauron keeps experimenting with the apartment complex, but one of the puppets, modeled after and controlled by Tomoe Enjo, winds up escaping the temporal loop and leaving the building. Sauron saw this as an opportunity to lure Shiki, so he implanted an impulse in Tomoe to seek her out of interest. This works, as Tomoe finds himself being saved by Shiki, and he chills out at her place for a while, without Netflix, mind you. They even visit the apartment complex together, where they ultimately discover the puppets reenacting their last day alive, as well as the room where Tomoe himself had actually been killed by his mother. He witnesses his own body rotting in his futon. Sauron pops out and fights Shiki. Because he had long ago awoken to his origin of stillness, he prevents Shiki from being able to see and sever his death lines. He wins, and imprisons Shiki inside a bounded field within the building. Sauron could now finally trace Shiki's mystic eyes right back to the root. Tomoe runs away and encounters Kokuto. He explains what happened to Shiki, and Kokuto and Toko try to save her. They figure out Sauron's plans by questioning Cornelius. Alone, Toko confronts both Cornelius and Sauron inside the apartment building. She gets past Cornelius, but is murdered by Sauron by having her heart ripped out. Technically though, she doesn't die, as Sauron intentionally keeps her alive by preserving her decapitated head in a jar. Cornelius was only going along with Sauron's plan to reach the root because he saw it as an opportunity to murder Toko and fix his lifelong inferiority complex. Sauron had a very specific reason for keeping Toko alive, but clearly Cornelius didn't get the memo, as he torments Kokuto with the head before crushing it. By effectively killing Toko for real, he unintentionally activated a puppet double of her body for her soul to transfer into. Making a return for revenge, Toko kills Cornelius with the help of her demon familiar. Now, snuck very loosely into the plot of this chapter is a special demon hunting sword called Kanesada Kuji. Earlier on, Kokuto encounters Akitaka, a member of the Ryogi clan, while trying to enter Shiki's locked apartment. In Shiki's absence, Akitaka gives him the sword to pass along to Shiki. When Kokuto gives it to Shiki at Garan no Do, Toko tells her not to unsheathe the sword inside, as it's powerful enough to destroy the bounded field surrounding the building. Tomoe, upon making his way back to the Ogawa complex, brings the sword along and leaves it in the building's elevator. Tomoe confronts Sauron, which gives Shiki the chance to escape her imprisonment. She uses her own fingers to sever the death lines of the bounded field and escape captivity. She uses the Kanesada Kuji to defeat Sauron and put an end to his plan of reaching the root. Another touch worth noting is how Tomoe, before the chaos of the Ogawa complex, valued having the key to his own home. His father gave him the house key as a sign of trust and closeness. He would then associate the key with having a place to belong and people to return to. Tomoe convinces Shiki to lock the door to her apartment, and later inspires her to want the keys to Kokuto's apartment as well. Essentially, Tomoe's values rubbed off on Shiki, and she wound up using that to get even closer to the one she loves. I haven't mentioned it yet, since it wasn't relevant at the time, but Mikiya Kokuto has a younger sister, Asaka. She, like a great many other anime sisters, wants to bang her brother without regard for their blood relation. Upset that he isn't a sister slammer, Asaka gets jealous of Shiki, and even starts training to become a magus as a means of rivaling her. As such, Asaka becomes Toko's apprentice. This pertains to the next chapter, 6, Oblivion Recorder. As it turns out, Toko has a job for Asaka. A job at her school to eliminate a magus controlling fairies. Some crazy shit went down at her school, the Reian Girls Academy. Basically, a student named Kaori Tachibana discovered her teacher, Hideo Hayama, doing drugs. In retaliation, he got her addicted to the drugs as well. Withdrawal got the better of her, as did ridicule and abuse from her classmates. So she committed suicide. One of her best friends, Misaya Oji, tries to figure out what happened to her, and finds Hideo to be responsible. She kills him by accident, and turns to her other teacher, Satsuki Kurogiri, for help. Turns out, he's a magus too, and he grants Misaya the ability to control low-level spirits that resemble fairies. She can use these to erase people's memories, and she ultimately tries to take revenge on the students that pushed Kaori to suicide. Asaka and Shiki step in, stopping Misaya and defeating Satsuki to settle the incident. So by this point, we'd expect everything to be all honky-dory with Shiki and friends, right? Wrong. There's still one prick left to deal with, and that's Leo. Recall that, after provoking the events that lead to Shiki's attempted suicide, Soren had Leo step off for a while. Well, now that Soren's dead, Leo has nobody to keep him in check, so of course he begins to murder more people. Enter Chapter 7, Murder Speculation Part 2. Shiki recalls being a suspect behind the murders, and that she believed it to be true. Wanting to trust in Kokuto's faith that she's innocent, the two of them split apart and search for the real culprit. Of course, both of them figure out that the serial killer was Leo the whole time. Being unable to control his murderous origin, Leo tries to bring out Shiki's murderous impulses as some sick form of companionship. Leo's antagonizing pushes Shiki to her limit, as she's torn once again between her urge to kill and her desire to live peacefully with Kokuto. Seeing how she's holding herself back, Leo decides to try and kill Kokuto as a way of provoking her. In the end, he leaves Kokuto heavily injured, and lies to Shiki, claiming that her lover is dead. Feeling like she has nothing left to lose, Shiki tears Leo into a pile of limbs. By doing so, she feels she's betrayed Kokuto's faith in her, yet when Kokuto reunites with her, she is forgiven, and all is well. The Kara no Kyoukai series has an epilogue, in which Kokuto finds Shiki alongside the row in the snow, just like how they first met. Shiki explains that, once again, as a rare occasion, she is controlled by her third personality, Origin Shiki, the one that has been dormant for so long, still connected to the root. She explains the circumstances of her presence, and offers to use her powers to fulfill Kokuto's greatest wish. Of course, Kokuto claims he's actually quite content, wishing for nothing, not even to have his injuries healed. It's a nice encounter that clarifies a few things about how Shiki's personalities work. It's not too relevant anymore given that I put it all into perspective way before. Strangely enough, there is one chapter of the novels that is yet to be animated by Ufotable. It's the final record chapter, which sadly I'm not familiar with. It basically follows 4 of the series' schoolgirls, Shizune, Asaka, Fujino, and Misaya, as they get trapped in a magical film projector that keeps them in a perpetual loop of disastrous scenarios. From my limited knowledge, I can see why this never got animated, at least compared to the other chapters, as it serves mostly as a side story. Now there's one last piece of the timeline, and it goes back to the second half of the Future Gospel chapter. 10 years after the bombing incident, Mitsuru works for Kokuto's agency to repay a massive debt to Shiki's crime syndicate. This is because Mana Ryogi, Shiki and Kokuto's daughter, recommended him. You heard me. Shiki and Kokuto have a child together, a sign that they are finally living peacefully together. It's a rather lovely way to end the story, isn't it? Well, except the crime syndicate thing. Obviously, the Ryogi family had been that way for a while now, but it makes me wonder just how criminal her syndicate is. If you can reveal more details about that, then I'd love to hear them. So there you have it, an overview analysis of Kata no Kyokai's lore. While the novels themselves provide much more detail about the lore, they aren't fully available in English. Del Rey came along and licensed Kata no Kyoukai for an English translation, but cancelled after only releasing the first chapter. This effectively killed off many fan translation projects, making full translations of the novels hard to come by. That's one reason I found this video worth making. It contextualizes the anime films using various sources of information, including the glorious Type Moon Wikia. That said, if you have any questions or want to point out anything I might have overlooked, please comment away. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and subscribe to OtakuDaiKun for more anime lists, reviews, recommendations, analyses, discussions, and let's plays. Until next time, celebrate your fandom.